and the only thing separating you from the freezing wind is a covered wagon that suddenly feels much smaller than it did this morning. It is the sort of night that looks beautiful from the safety of a warm home, but you are standing directly inside it, blinking as icy flakes sting your face and settle into your eyelashes. You probably will not survive this if you expect modern comforts to appear from nowhere. They absolutely will not. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are here, let everyone know where you're listening from, along with your local time, now. Dim the lights and breathe slowly as the prairie stretches around you like a silent white ocean. The wind arrives first. It never politely introduces itself. It simply pushes against your shoulders with surprising force, slipping beneath your coat, crawling down your sleeves, and reminding you that nature has never signed any agreement promising to be fair. You pull your hat lower. It barely helps. Snow races sideways instead of falling. Tiny crystals scratch against your cheeks like handfuls of fine sand. You instinctively turn your face away, only to discover that the wind has somehow circled around and found your other cheek instead. The prairie has very few places to hide. That is one of its defining features. Beautiful in summer, perhaps. Less charming when winter decides to demonstrate who is truly in charge. Your wagon creaks nearby. The white canvas covering flaps sharply, sounding almost alive. Wooden wheels groan as another gust rocks the entire vehicle. Inside sits nearly everything you own. Clothing, flour, cooking pots, bedding, spare tools, a family Bible carefully wrapped in cloth. Small treasures that seemed perfectly organized yesterday now resemble a puzzle someone has enthusiastically shaken. You're not traveling alone. Several wagons form part of the same company, each carrying families who have slowly become familiar faces over the long journey west. No one has known each other forever, yet hardship has a curious way of introducing strangers much faster than polite conversation ever could. Someone calls through the wind. The words disappear almost immediately. Another voice answers, equally lost in the storm. You nod anyway, pretending you understood something useful. One well-established historical fact often surprises modern people. Many emigrants heading west in the early 1840s relied on oxen rather than horses, because oxen were stronger over long distances, cheaper to replace, and better suited for hauling heavy wagons across difficult country. They were slower, certainly, but endurance mattered far more than speed when crossing thousands of miles. The oxen stand with lowered heads, snow collecting across their broad backs until they almost resemble wandering boulders. You cannot help feeling sorry for them. Then you remember that your own nose has gone numb. Sympathy briefly becomes a shared experience. The smell of the prairie has changed completely. During warmer months you might notice dry grass, damp earth, wildflowers, or fresh rain. Tonight the air carries almost no scent at all except cold itself, mixed with the faint smell of leather harnesses, damp wool, animal breath, and wood that has absorbed weeks of travel. It is strangely clean, almost too clean. Every breath feels sharp enough to polish the inside of your lungs. Your boots crunch into snow that has drifted around the wagon wheels. Each step requires effort because fresh snow hides uneven ground beneath it. You discover one frozen rut the unpleasant way, stumbling forward and catching yourself on the wagon frame. Grace has officially abandoned the evening. No one laughs. Everyone is too busy staying upright. The covered wagon itself is both reassuring and disappointing. From a distance it appears cozy enough. Popular imagination often treats these wagons as comfortable little homes rolling happily toward adventure. Reality is much less generous. They were freight vehicles first. Sleeping inside them happened because necessity demanded it, not because anyone had carefully designed an enjoyable bedroom experience. The canvas covering offers protection from snow, but very little insulation against the bitter air. You place one hand against it. The fabric feels stiff with cold. Another blast of wind pushes it inward before letting it snap back again. Some travellers privately nicknamed their wagons prairie schooners because the white canvas reminded them of the sails of ships crossing the sea, standing here tonight, with snow swirling instead of waves. The comparison suddenly makes perfect sense. You're sailing across an ocean after all. It simply happens to be made of grass hidden beneath winter. A curious story occasionally appears in old frontier traditions. Some travellers believed hanging a horseshoe inside the wagon with its open end facing upward would collect good fortune throughout the journey. Others insisted turning it upside down allowed luck to pour over the family instead. Which version brought better results depended entirely upon whom you asked around the campfire. Practical evidence remained rather limited. Historians still argue whether severe winter crossings in years like this were mostly the result of poor planning, or whether rapidly changing weather simply trapped otherwise careful emigrant parties at the worst possible moment. The truth probably sits somewhere between those possibilities, hidden beneath layers of personal diaries, faded memories, and unpredictable weather patterns that no one could fully control. The daylight is fading. Clouds swallow what little sunlight remains until afternoon begins looking suspiciously like evening. You glance toward the western horizon. There is no horizon anymore, only white, only movement, only endless wind carrying fresh snow across land that refuses to reveal where it ends. Your fingers ache despite thick gloves. First they hurt, then they tingle. Then, strangely enough, they begin feeling almost comfortable. That last part is not comforting at all. You rub your hands together quickly, blowing warm breath across stiff knuckles. Tiny clouds escape your mouth before disappearing into the storm. Even your own breathing feels temporary, nearby. One child asks when everyone will stop for the night. A mother answers softly that it will be soon. You suspect she hopes that is true as much as the child does. There is something quietly remarkable about ordinary conversations continuing inside extraordinary circumstances. People still ask about missing spoons. Someone worries over flour getting wet. Another person cannot remember where they packed an extra mitten. Life stubbornly refuses to become dramatic every second of every day. Even during a blizzard, someone is probably wondering where they put the cooking pot. That oddly feels reassuring. The familiar survives beside the frightening. Your stomach reminds you that lunch happened many hours ago. Hunger mixes with exhaustion until both become difficult to separate. You know sleep will eventually come, yet already suspect it will not resemble the peaceful rest promised by soft mattresses and warm bedrooms. Tonight every decision will revolve around staying warm enough to greet the morning. The wind rises once more. The wagons slow. People begin searching the snowy landscape for any place that might offer the slightest advantage against the coming night. You tighten your coat, adjust your grip on the wagon, and take another careful step forward, following the others into the swirling white, hoping that somewhere just ahead lies a place where this restless prairie will allow you a few precious hours of uneasy sleep. The search for a place to stop begins almost without anyone announcing it. There is no grand command carried across the prairie. There's only a shared understanding that daylight is slipping away and that continuing blindly into the storm would invite even greater trouble. The wagons creep forward at little more than walking pace. Every person scans the snowy landscape, hoping to spot something, anything. That might give a small advantage against the relentless weather. You quickly learn that on the open prairie, shelter is a very generous word. A slight rise in the ground counts as shelter. A cluster of shrubs no taller than your shoulders counts as shelter. Even a shallow depression where the wind seems just a little less eager to slap your face suddenly feels like a luxury resort by frontier standards. The snow continues blowing sideways. It slips into every gap between your clothing. Tiny icy grains collect around your collar and melt against your neck before becoming cold again. You had forgotten that water can somehow feel even colder after it has already been freezing. Nature enjoys little jokes like that. Your boots sink deeper now. Beneath the fresh powder lies older snow packed into uneven ridges. Every few steps your foot twists slightly, your ankles protest. The muscles in your legs burn with quiet determination. Walking has become less about moving forward and more about negotiating with the ground. The wagon wheels leave faint tracks for only a few moments before the wind wipes them away. It is strangely unsettling. The prairie seems determined to erase every sign that people have ever crossed it. You glance behind. Nothing remains except white. One of the older men walks ahead with careful, measured steps, using a long stick to test the snow in front of him. Hidden hollows can swallow a wheel or break an axle if luck turns sour. Every step is a question. Every patch of snow hides its own answer. A mainstream historical fact worth remembering is that a broken wagon axle was among the greatest fears of westward emigrants. Spare parts were often carried. But replacing heavy wooden components during severe weather demanded strength, time, and precious daylight. Sometimes travellers were forced to abandon damaged wagons altogether if repairs became impossible. You silently thank every sturdy wheel beneath your own wagon, for now. The wind whistles through the iron fittings. Leather harnesses creak as the oxen continue pulling with patient determination. Their broad hooves press steadily into the snow. Steam rises from their noses in slow clouds. Frost clings to the coarse hair around their mouths, giving each animal a frosted beard that would almost seem amusing if the circumstances were not so serious. One ox pauses. It simply stands still, not because it is stubborn, but because even animals sometimes question the wisdom of walking into a blizzard. The driver gently encourages it forward with calm words instead of anger. Shouting would only waste energy. Besides, the ox has probably earned the right to hesitate. You notice something else. The silence between gusts. It lasts only a heartbeat before another roar arrives. Yet during those tiny pauses the prairie becomes almost impossibly still. No birds sing, no insects buzz, no distant rivers murmur. It is as though winter has politely asked every living thing to keep its voice down. Then the wind returns. It always returns. You pull your scarf higher. Only your eyes remain exposed. Even your eyelashes now carry tiny beads of ice. Someone points toward a low stretch of land ahead. It is hardly dramatic. There are no towering cliffs or dense forests waiting to welcome weary travellers. Instead, the ground dips gently before rising again on the far side. The depression is shallow, perhaps only a few feet lower than the surrounding prairie. Tonight, that feels like finding treasure. The wagon slowly angled toward it. The difference becomes noticeable almost immediately. Not warm, certainly not comfortable, simply less terrible. The wind no longer strikes with quite the same force. it still reaches you. But the shallow hollow interrupts its full strength. You suddenly understand why experienced travellers spent so much time studying the land instead of charging ahead without thought. The prairie rewards patience. Sometimes. You kneel to scoop a handful of snow. It is dry and powdery, refusing to pack together easily. Good for drifting. Poor for building protective walls. You let it slip through your fingers like white sand. Your gloves are damp now. That realization brings no joy. Damp clothing is an unwelcome companion during winter travel. Once moisture settles into wool or leather, keeping warm becomes much harder. You flex your fingers repeatedly, encouraging blood to continue its journey toward your fingertips. Nearby, 2 women inspect the surrounding brush. There is not much. Thin, leafless stems poke through the snow. Few twisted shrubs cling stubbornly to life. Firewood is scarce. You begin noticing every fallen branch as though it were made of silver. A quirky frontier belief occasionally surfaced among emigrant groups that certain patches of prairie grass left standing through winter indicated kind ground.
What's my one rule? I always pay because Pocket Broker covers me. For dinner, for mom, for friends at the bar. I move my funds with no extra costs. I always pay because Pocket Broker always covers.
Transfers are fast, fees are clear, and everything runs from one app. Let me show you. I've been using this app called Rizon. It's one of the easiest ways to hold, send, and spend dollars globally. You get a global USD account where you can keep dollars or pay with a Visa card for online transactions, subscriptions, and travel. Most importantly, Rizon gives you multiple bank accounts to receive money in various currencies. So whether you send money, get paid online, or spend globally, this banking alternative makes it simple. Download Rizon today.
Ground. Places supposedly favoured by good fortune for camping. There was no scientific basis for the idea, of course, but after weeks or months of uncertainty, many travellers found comfort in reading hopeful signs from the landscape around them. Hope has always been surprisingly lightweight. People carry it even when everything else feels impossibly heavy. You inhale deeply, the air stings, your nose catches faint scents drifting through the hollow, cold leather, oxen, wet canvas, smoke, not much smoke, just enough to tell you that someone has finally coaxed a few sparks into becoming a tiny fire somewhere among the wagons. That smell instantly lifts everyone's spirits. Remarkable, really. A thin ribbon of smoke can smell almost magical when warmth has become the rarest luxury imaginable. Children gather close to adults without being asked. No one wanders far. The storm has shrunk the world. Yesterday the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. Tonight your entire universe extends only as far as you can clearly see through blowing snow. Perhaps 30 yards. Perhaps less. Beyond that waits only whiteness. Historians still debate whether emigrant companies that stayed tightly grouped during severe storms consistently fared better than parties that spread out while searching for campsites. Personal journals suggest both methods had successes and failures, reminding us that survival often depended upon countless small circumstances beyond anyone's control. Your shoulders ache from helping steady the wagon over rough ground. You barely notice the strain while moving. Now that the pace slows, every muscle begins introducing itself. Your back, your knees, your neck. Even your jaw seems tired from clenching against the cold. The oxen finally stop, not dramatically, simply one careful step at a time until they stand quietly. their sides rising and falling with steady breaths. For a moment nobody speaks. Everyone simply listens. The wind still blows overhead. But inside the shallow depression, its voice has softened enough that you can hear the gentle snorting of the animals, the rustle of canvas, the creak of settling wood, and the muffled crunch of boots moving through fresh snow. It almost sounds peaceful. Almost. You know this is only the beginning of the evening. The wagons still need arranging. Animals must be secured, supplies have to be protected. Somewhere inside that crowded wagon waits a place where you will attempt to sleep. Though calling it a bed would require an imagination as vast as the prairie itself. You brush snow from your sleeves, pull one last deep breath of icy air into your lungs, and step toward the waiting wagons as everyone begins transforming this lonely patch of frozen earth into a temporary home for the longest night of the journey. The moment the wagons stop moving, the quiet urgency begins. No one wastes precious minutes standing around to admire the scenery. There is very little scenery left to admire anyway. The prairie has hidden itself beneath drifting snow, and the blizzard still prowls across the open land with stubborn determination. You tighten your gloves and immediately join the work. Every task matters. Every pair of hands matters. The wagons cannot simply remain scattered wherever they happen to stop. They need to become something more than vehicles. For tonight, they must become walls. The drivers speak calmly to the oxen, guiding them into position one careful step at a time. The great animals seem almost relieved to move slowly after the long struggle through the storm. Their hooves sink deeply into the snow with dull, heavy thumps. The wagons gradually form a rough circle, not a perfect one. Nothing on the frontier is ever perfectly measured. One wagon sits slightly crooked. Another leaves a wider gap than anyone would prefer. Still, together they create a barrier that can soften at least part of the relentless wind. You step back for a moment and study the arrangement. It is surprisingly comforting. A few hours ago, each wagon felt alone beneath the enormous sky. Now they stand shoulder to shoulder like old friends, refusing to abandon one another. The wind rushes against the outside of the circle, but inside, the air feels just a little calmer. The difference is not dramatic enough to make anyone smile with delight, yet it is enough to make everyone breathe a little easier. Sometimes survival comes in very small improvements. One well-established historical fact is that wagon companies often circle their wagons when stopping for the night, although not always because of attacks as popular stories suggest. More often the arrangement helped organize camp, protect livestock, reduce wind exposure, and keep people together in unfamiliar country. Hollywood, as you might guess, has occasionally preferred a more exciting explanation. Reality was usually far more practical. Someone begins unhitching the oxen. The thick leather straps creak as frozen buckles resist stiff fingers. You reach out to help loosen one of the harnesses. The leather feels almost as hard as wood after hours in the bitter cold. Your fingertips complain immediately. You ignore them. The ox gives a slow shake of its enormous head. Snow scatters from its ears and back. A cloud of warm breath rolls into the icy air before disappearing almost instantly. You gently rub the animal's neck. Its winter coat is coarse beneath your glove. The warmth coming from its body is astonishing. For one brief moment you almost envy the ox. Then you remember it has spent the entire day pulling several thousand pounds through deep snow. Perhaps envy is unnecessary. The animals are led toward the center of the circle where they will be easier to watch. A few receive extra feed saved carefully for difficult days like this. The sound of chewing fills the air. It is oddly soothing, life continuing exactly as it should. Nearby, someone begins stacking wooden buckets upside down so they will not fill with blowing snow. Another traveller gathers loose ropes before the wind can carry them away. A teenage boy chases a hat that has suddenly decided to begin its own westward journey. The hat wins for several seconds. Eventually the boy catches it against a wagon wheel. Victory comes with frozen ears. You cannot help smiling, even in miserable weather. Small moments of quiet comedy refuse to disappear. The smell of animals grows stronger inside the wagon circle. Oxen, horses, damp leather, wool blankets, and faint wood smoke mingle into a scent that will probably cling to your clothing for days. It is not unpleasant. It simply smells like survival. You notice the snow collecting against the outside wheels. Drifts are already beginning to form where the wind slows after striking the wagons. Nature is slowly building additional walls without asking permission. Perhaps that is one favour the storm is willing to grant. A curious frontier tale occasionally appeared in emigrant journals describing mysterious lights dancing across snowy plains during fierce winter nights. Some believed these pale glows were wandering spirits guiding lost travellers. Others blamed unusual reflections from ice crystals carried through the air. Modern explanations usually point toward atmospheric effects, but the stories themselves remain wonderfully eerie. You glance into the blowing snow. Nothing glows tonight. Just white. Just wind. And honestly, that is mysterious enough. The drivers carefully inspect every wagon. A loose chain is tightened. A wheel wedge is checked. A rope is pulled snug. One cracked board receives an extra strip of leather for support. Small repairs completed now might prevent much larger problems before morning. You run your hand along the side of your own wagon. The wood feels rough beneath your glove. Tiny patches of frost sparkle wherever moisture has frozen across the grain. The canvas above snaps softly with each passing gust, sounding almost like a sail aboard a distant ship. The nickname Prairie Schooner returns to your thoughts. Out here it feels entirely appropriate. Except oceans rarely try to freeze your eyebrows. Your stomach rumbles again. The scent of smoke has grown slightly stronger. Someone has managed to coax a modest fire into existence using carefully protected dry kindling carried inside the wagons. It is not large enough for celebration, but its orange glow seems almost miraculous against the endless white landscape. People naturally drift toward it, not too close. There is barely enough fuel to cook supper. Every stick must be used wisely. Children gather beside their parents. They stamp their boots to restore feeling to cold feet. One little girl reaches toward the flames before her mother gently reminds her to stay back. She nods with exaggerated seriousness. About 10 seconds later, she inches forward again. Some things never change across generations. Historians continue discussing whether experienced wagon captains deliberately selected campsites based primarily on prevailing winter winds, or whether immediate practical concerns such as water, grazing, and terrain almost always outweighed weather considerations. The surviving diaries suggest different leaders made different choices depending upon the conditions they faced. Experience certainly helps. Luck helps too. You become aware of the fading light. The world is slowly turning blue. Snow reflects what little daylight remains until the prairie glows with a strange, gentle brightness. Shadows soften. The outlines of the wagons blur beneath drifting flakes. It is beautiful. That may seem like an odd thing to admit, yet difficult places often carry unexpected beauty. Perhaps beauty simply becomes easier to notice when comfort has disappeared. The cold grows sharper. You can feel it reaching deeper through your boots despite all your movement. Your shoulders stiffen, your cheeks burn. Every breath leaves a cloud that hangs briefly before joining the frozen air. A nearby woman quietly counts blankets while another checks sacks of flour to make certain none have become soaked. Someone searches for a missing spoon. There it is, tucked beside a cooking pot exactly where no one thought to look. You smile to yourself. Yesterday it was probably an ordinary spoon. Tonight it feels oddly valuable. The wagon circle is complete now. The animals are secure. The first hints of supper begin taking shape beside the struggling fire. Soon the real challenge will begin. Transforming a freight wagon packed with supplies into a place where human beings can somehow rest through one of the coldest nights of the journey. You brush another layer of snow from your coat. Watch the last pale light fade beyond the drifting prairie, and climb toward the waiting wagon, knowing that every inch of space inside will soon matter more than ever before. The work outside is finally finished, at least for now. The wind has not surrendered. It continues to sweep over the prairie with patient determination. But the wagons stand together. The animals are settled as well as they can be, and every traveller understands that the next task cannot be delayed any longer. You have to turn a freight wagon into a place where people can sleep. You stand beside the rear of the wagon and look inside. In daylight it always seems to have enough room. Now it appears impossibly small. The supplies that have carried you across hundreds of miles are still here. Flour sacks, cooking pots, spare clothing, toolboxes, coils of rope, buckets, barrels, folded quilts, and bundles wrapped carefully in canvas all compete for the same precious space. It feels less like entering a bedroom and more like climbing into an overstuffed cupboard. The first job is simple in theory. Move everything that can safely be moved. In practice, nothing feels simple. Every object has become heavier during the day, partly because of the cold and partly because your muscles are quietly protesting every movement. You lift a wooden crate and slide it toward the front of the wagon. Someone beside you shifts a barrel into a tighter corner. A rolled buffalo robe is tucked against the wagon wall to make room for bedding. Every inch matters. A few extra inches can mean the difference between sleeping on your side or spending the entire night folded into a shape that would confuse a modern yoga instructor. You smile at the thought. Barely. The cold discourages unnecessary laughter. Your breath hangs inside the wagon in pale clouds. They drift upward until touching the chilled canvas roof, where tiny droplets immediately begin freezing. You reach up and touch the inside of the cover. The fabric feels stiff, not brittle enough to crack, thankfully, but certainly nothing like the soft canvas you handled during warmer weather. Surviving journals from emigrants repeatedly describe how covered wagons were designed to protect cargo rather than provide comfortable living quarters. Families adapted them as sleeping spaces only when circumstances demanded it. Many people actually preferred sleeping beneath the open sky during pleasant weather because there was more room and better air. Tonight, of course, sleeping outside would be an entirely different sort of adventure, one that nobody wishes to experience. You kneel and begin brushing away bits of loose snow that blew inside whenever the rear flap opened. The snow has already started melting into tiny damp patches on the wooden floor. That will never do. Anything damp becomes the enemy after sunset. A folded cloth quickly wipes away what moisture you can find. The boards underneath feel rough beneath your fingers. They have carried thousands of pounds across rivers, hills, muddy trails, and frozen ground. Their surface bears scratches from tools, barrels, and countless boots. These are hard-working boards. They have earned every mark. Someone hands you a bundle of clothing, not because anyone plans to wear every piece tonight. Instead, coats that are not immediately needed become makeshift cushions against the hard wagon sides. Spare shirts are tucked into awkward corners. Wool stockings fill narrow gaps where cold air likes to creep inside. Nothing goes to waste. Even a rolled scarf becomes useful. You suddenly understand that frontier comfort is less about owning luxurious things and more about convincing ordinary things to perform entirely new jobs. Outside, another gust shakes the wagon. The canvas ripples overhead with a loud flutter. The wooden frame answers with a familiar creak. For a brief moment you imagine the wagon speaking, not complaining, simply clearing its throat after another long day. An old frontier story claimed that wagons developed personalities during long journeys. Some families affectionately named theirs, speaking to the vehicle almost as though it were another travelling companion. Whether this reflected loneliness, affection, or simple humour is difficult to say, but more than one diary contains references to particularly faithful wagons that had carried families safely across impossible country. You glance around your own temporary shelter. Perhaps there is something to that, after all. This wagon has become far more than transportation. It is your pantry, your wardrobe, your storage room. Soon it will become your bedroom, and tomorrow morning it will once again become your wagon. The transformation happens every single day. You carefully inspect the canvas ties along the side. One has loosened. Your fingers are stiff, making the knot strangely difficult to tighten. The leather strap resists your efforts before finally slipping into place. You give it another firm pull. Better, much better. Cold drafts are impossible to eliminate completely, but every small improvement counts. Several letters written during westward migrations describe families stuffing spare cloth into tiny openings where the canvas met the wagon frame. It was a simple solution, but surprisingly effective at reducing the worst of the wind. You follow the same idea. A folded piece of wool disappears into one narrow gap. Another is tucked near the rear flap. The breeze immediately feels less determined. Not gone, simply less enthusiastic. You will gladly accept that. The smell inside the wagon slowly changes as more bedding arrives. Fresh wool, leather, faint cedar from a wooden chest, a lingering trace of flour dust, hints of smoked bacon wrapped carefully inside cloth. All of it mixes into a scent that somehow feels reassuring. It smells lived in. It smells familiar. It smells like home has been packed into a moving box. Outside, voices drift softly through the evening. Nobody speaks loudly anymore. The storm has encouraged quieter conversations. You hear someone reminding a child to remove damp mittens before climbing inside. Another traveller asks whether the cooking pot has been cleaned. Someone laughs gently after discovering a spoon tucked into the pocket of an apron. Apparently the missing spoon from earlier has found a companion. Life insists on remaining ordinary, even here. Researchers continue examining how emigrant families organize the cramped interiors of covered wagons, because first-hand descriptions vary considerably. Some accounts describe remarkably tidy arrangements, while others suggest that long days on the trail often reduced even the neatest plans into cheerful disorder. The truth likely depended on the family, the weather, and how exhausting the previous day's travel had been. You suspect tonight would challenge even the most organized household. The wooden boughs supporting the canvas arch overhead like the ribs of some enormous animal. You run your hand along one smooth curve. The wood is cold but solid. Reliable. That word matters. Reliable. In a world where weather changes without warning and every mile brings uncertainty, reliable objects become deeply comforting. You settle one final crate into position. There. The floor is finally clear enough, not spacious, certainly not, but clear enough for quilts and blankets to follow. You ease yourself backward and sit for a moment, listening. The fire outside crackles faintly. Oxen snort somewhere beyond the wagon circle. Wind hums through the canvas with a lower, steadier voice than before. Snow taps gently against the roof. Against the roof. The sounds blend together into an oddly peaceful rhythm. Not silence, never silence. Instead, the quiet music of a frontier camp preparing itself for the longest hours of the night. You know the hardest part has not arrived yet. The wagon may now be arranged, the drafts may be reduced, the supplies may finally be tucked into every available corner, but a bare wooden floor remains exactly that. Soon you must build a bed from quilts, robes, straw, and imagination, hoping that a few carefully layered blankets will stand between your family and the bitter prairie cold waiting patiently just beyond the canvas. The empty floor does not stay empty for long. The moment the last crate is tucked into place, bundles of bedding begin appearing from every corner of the wagon. Each one has been protected with surprising care during the journey. Food is essential, certainly. Tools are irreplaceable. But when a winter night settles across the prairie, blankets become something close to treasure. You untie the first bundle. A quilt unfolds into your hands. Its colours are muted now beneath the fading light, but you can still make out neat squares stitched together months or perhaps years before this journey ever began. Someone sat beside a hearth far away, patiently sewing each piece with no idea that one day it would be spread across the floor of a wagon somewhere in the middle of a frozen prairie. That thought lingers with you. Every stitch carries a little piece of home. You shake the quilt gently. A faint smell of clean wool and cedar rises into the cold air. It is such an ordinary scent, yet tonight it feels almost luxurious. The first layer goes directly onto the wooden boards. It does not make the floor soft. Nothing could truly accomplish that. Instead, it creates a small barrier between sleeping bodies and timber that has spent the entire day absorbing winter's relentless chill. Another blanket follows, then another. Each layer promises just a little more warmth. Each one quietly whispers that tomorrow still exists. You smooth the fabric with the palm of your hand. Tiny frost crystals sparkle near the wagon entrance, where cold air slips inside whenever the flap is lifted. You brush them away. They return almost immediately. The prairie is persistent. You are learning to be persistent as well. Several first-hand accounts from westward emigrants mention that quilts were among the most valued possessions families carried. Many had been handmade by relatives before the journey began. serving not only as bedding but also as treasured reminders of loved ones left behind in the East. Looking at the careful stitching, it is easy to understand why. These are more than blankets. They are memories you can wrap around yourself. Someone passes you a buffalo robe. It is astonishingly heavy. The thick hide settles across the growing bed with a satisfying weight. The coarse hair still feels dense despite weeks of travel. You run your fingers through it. It is surprisingly warm. Buffalo robes had earned an excellent reputation on the frontier for good reason. Their natural insulation helped travellers endure conditions that would have quickly defeated lighter coverings. You silently thank the animal that once wore it. Its service has continued long after its own journey ended. Outside, the wind presses against the canvas again. This time the wagon hardly moves. The circle of wagons has done its work well. Not perfectly. Nothing can truly defeat a prairie blizzard, but well enough. The sounds outside have changed too. Earlier the camp buzzed with activity. Now conversations drift more slowly through the evening air. Someone tells a child a short story while folding clothing. A mother hums a tune almost too quietly to hear. Nearby, an older man coughs into the darkness before clearing his throat. The noises feel softer. The camp is settling. You remove your outer coat for only a moment while arranging bedding. The cold notices immediately. It slips through your shirt with remarkable speed. Within seconds you pull the coat back on. Lesson learned. There will be no unnecessary heroics tonight. One forgotten frontier custom involved warming smooth stones beside the evening fire before wrapping them in cloth and placing them beneath blankets. The stones slowly release their stored heat during the first hours of sleep. The practice required great care because stones heated too quickly or chosen from damp ground could crack unexpectedly. But when done properly, they offered a welcome bit of comfort during bitter nights. Unfortunately, suitable stones are not always easy to find beneath deep snow. You make do without them. Improvisation has become another travelling companion. A straw tick appears next. It is thinner than you expected. You had imagined something resembling a mattress. Instead, it feels more like a large cloth sack filled with dry straw. Still, compared with bare wagon boards, it is magnificent. You spread it carefully across the centre of the wagon. The straw shifts inside with a gentle rustling sound. Not perfectly even. One end bulges slightly higher than the other. You kneel and redistribute the filling with both hands. Better, not perfect. Good enough. That phrase returns often during frontier travel. Good enough. It may be the unofficial motto of every successful emigrant. The smell of dry straw mixes pleasantly with wool and leather. For a brief moment you close your eyes. The scent reminds you of barns, harvests, and quieter seasons. Memory arrives through the nose as easily as through the mind. You wonder if everyone around you is remembering home in their own way. Perhaps someone is thinking about an old farmhouse, another about a village street, someone else about a favourite chair beside a fireplace. The prairie allows room for such thoughts. Especially after dark, you begin arranging sleeping places, children toward the centre, adults closer to the edges where cold drafts are strongest. It seems sensible. The youngest deserve every possible advantage. Parents quietly agree without much discussion. No one argues, everyone understands. Modern researchers examining emigrant family diaries have noticed that sleeping arrangements often shifted from night to night depending on weather, available space, illness, or the age of the children. There was rarely one fixed pattern. Adaptation proved just as valuable as careful planning. Flexibility keeps people comfortable. Sometimes it keeps them alive. You roll spare clothing into small bundles, instant pillows, not elegant, perfectly practical. A folded coat supports one person's head. A bundle of extra shirts supports another. You briefly consider how expensive modern camping pillows can be. Then you glance at your wool socks stuffed inside a spare shirt. The frontier would probably find modern shopping catalogues rather entertaining. Outside, someone adds another piece of wood to the fire. The flames brighten for a few moments. Orange light filters softly through the pale canvas walls, making the inside of the wagon glow like a lantern. It is beautiful in a quiet way. The flickering light dances across quilts, wooden bows, leather straps, and tired faces. Everyone suddenly appears calmer, warmer too, even if only in appearance. The illusion is welcome. There are still boots to remove, not completely. Some travellers choose to loosen them rather than take them off entirely, worried that frozen leather may become difficult to pull on again before dawn. You understand the concern. Cold has a remarkable talent for turning simple tasks into complicated ones. Your feet finally rest upon the layered bedding. The difference is immediate. The floor still feels firm beneath everything. Yet the sharp bite of frozen wood has softened. You exhale slowly. Perhaps tonight will not be comfortable. Comfort is asking too much. But perhaps it will be survivable. That is enough. You pull one quilt over your knees while waiting for the others to finish arranging their places. Outside, the wind continues its endless conversation with the prairie. Inside, blankets, robes, straw, and familiar hands have built the closest thing to a bedroom that this frozen wilderness can offer. Soon everyone will climb inside together, bringing the last of the day's warmth with them, and the crowded little wagon will become not just a shelter from the storm, but a tiny island of shared hope surrounded by an ocean of snow. The bedding is finally in place. Now comes another challenge that feels just as important. Supper. No one expects a feast. Those expectations disappeared somewhere hundreds of miles back along the trail. Tonight the goal is wonderfully modest. Fill empty stomachs, warm cold hands, and perhaps lift tired spirits for a little while before everyone climbs into the wagon. You step back outside. The cold greets you immediately, as though it has been waiting patiently for your return. The fire sits near the center of the wagon circle, smaller than any campfire you would willingly build under ordinary circumstances. Every stick of wood has become valuable. Large flames may look cheerful, but they also consume precious fuel with alarming speed. So the fire burns low, carefully fed, closely watched. Its orange glow paints the surrounding snow with gentle shades of gold and amber. It almost makes the camp look cozy, almost. You kneel beside the flames, stretching your hands toward the warmth. The sensation is strange. Your palms grow pleasantly warm while your back remains bitterly cold. Turn around, and the situation reverses immediately. The prairie refuses to allow anyone the luxury of being warm all at once. It insists upon compromise. Someone hangs an iron pot above the fire. The metal is blackened from months of cooking over open flames. Soot coats the outside in uneven patches. The handle has become polished where countless hands have lifted it day after day. It is not beautiful. It is dependable. Dependable matters far more. Several emigrant journals describe how simple meals became the backbone of life on the trail. Flour, salt pork, beans, coffee, dried fruit, cornmeal, and bacon appeared again and again in surviving accounts because they travelled reasonably well and could last for long periods if carefully protected from moisture. Fresh vegetables have become distant memories. Warm bread from an oven belongs to another life. Tonight's supper begins with melting snow. You fill a bucket with clean white drifts gathered from beyond the camp. The bucket looks wonderfully full. You pour it into the pot. A few minutes later, it has become only a shallow pool of water. Snow has an impressive talent for making promises it cannot keep. You add another bucket, and another. The process feels almost ridiculous. You work so hard collecting great heaps of snow, only to receive a modest amount of water in return. Nature has a dry sense of humour. Steam slowly rises from the pot. Everyone watches. The sight alone feels encouraging, warmth made visible. Someone slices pieces of salt pork with careful precision. Nothing is wasted. Every portion is measured by experience rather than appetite. The meat sizzles as it reaches the hot iron. The sound instantly captures everyone's attention. After hours surrounded by wind and silence, even a gentle sizzle seems wonderfully lively. The smell follows next, rich, savoury, familiar. It drifts through the wagon circle, mixing with wood smoke and cold air until the entire camp seems to breathe more deeply. Hunger sharpens every sense. You'd almost forgotten how comforting cooking can smell. Nearby, another traveller stirs a pot of beans that have been soaking since earlier in the day. They cook slowly, thickening into a hearty mixture that promises warmth, if not excitement. Excitement is overrated. Warm beans are considerably more useful. One delightful little detail appears in several frontier memoirs. Some children became surprisingly skilled at judging whether supper was nearly ready simply by the colour of the steam rising from the cooking pots. Whether this reflected genuine observation or childhood imagination remains uncertain. But more than one adult later admitted that the young judges were often impressively accurate. You smile as one small boy leans toward the pot with exaggerated seriousness. He announces that supper smells finished. His mother laughs. The cook politely ignores his expert opinion for another few minutes. The waiting continues. You pull a tin cup from your supplies. It bears tiny dents collected over months of travel. Each mark tells a forgotten story. Perhaps one came from crossing a rocky stream, another from being dropped during a hurried breakfast, another from rattling against iron tools inside the wagon. Objects travel alongside people. They gather memories too. Coffee begins brewing in a smaller pot. Its aroma spreads quickly across the camp. Strong, dark, slightly bitter. To modern tastes it might seem unusually robust. But after a freezing day on the prairie it smells almost miraculous. Not everyone drinks coffee. Of course. Children receive warm water or thin broth instead. Even plain hot water feels luxurious tonight. You wrap both hands around your cup. The heat travels slowly into stiff fingers. It almost hurts at first. Then relief follows. You had not realized just how cold your hands had become until feeling returned. An old trail anecdote tells of one emigrant who jokingly claimed that coffee should be counted as essential wagon equipment, somewhere between spare axle grease and ammunition. His companions reportedly laughed, then quietly agreed. Whether the conversation happened exactly that way is impossible to prove, but the sentiment certainly matches countless diary entries praising a hot drink after long days on the trail. The meal is served. There are no elaborate plates, no polished table, no embroidered cloth. People eat from simple bowls while standing or sitting on overturned buckets, wooden chests, or folded blankets placed carefully upon the snow. You take your first bite. It is hot enough to make you pause, then wonderfully satisfying. The beans are soft, the pork is salty. Together they create something far greater than the individual ingredients, not fancy. Not memorable for a cookbook, perfect for this evening. Conversation slowly returns. Someone comments that tomorrow's weather surely cannot be worse. Another gently replies that the prairie enjoys proving such statements wrong. Several people chuckle. The laughter feels genuine. Perhaps because nobody fully believes tomorrow's optimism. Perhaps because everyone wants to. Researchers continue comparing weather records with emigrant journals to better understand how travellers responded to prolonged winter storms, while the exact menus varied from company to company. The surviving evidence consistently shows that warm meals carried emotional value far beyond their nutritional importance. You understand why. This supper does more than quiet your hunger. It reminds you that normal life still exists, people still gather, they still share food. They still pass bowls from hand to hand, the storm may surround the camp, but it has not entered the circle completely. A child drops a spoon, it disappears into fresh snow. 3 adults immediately begin searching. The spoon is found within moments. It receives a triumphant cheer, entirely out of proportion to its size. Nobody finds this excessive. A spoon is a spoon. Losing one serves no useful purpose. The fire burns a little lower. Someone carefully places one final piece of wood onto the glowing coals, not because more warmth would be unwelcome, simply because tomorrow will require fuel as well. Every decision quietly reaches into the future. Your bowl is empty now. You scrape the last beans with a piece of bread that has become slightly firm in the cold. Nothing remains, exactly as intended. The dishes are cleaned with remarkable efficiency. Very little water can be spared. Snow helps where it can. Clean cloth finishes the task. Within minutes, the cooking pots are packed away once again. The camp grows quieter. People pull coats tighter. Children yawn. Parents exchange tired glances that need no words. The fire settles into glowing embers. Above, the snow continues drifting across the dark prairie without hurry, as though it has all the time in the world. You rise, brush a few frozen flakes from your sleeves, and turn toward the waiting wagon. Inside. The carefully arranged quilts and buffalo robes promise the closest thing to comfort that this remarkable journey can offer. And beyond the canvas walls, another long winter night patiently waits to test every traveller before dawn. The last glow of the fire fades behind you as your attention shifts toward the animals. For a few precious minutes after supper, your own hunger has disappeared. Your hands have remembered what warmth feels like. The quilts waiting inside the wagon sound increasingly inviting. But the oxen cannot tuck themselves beneath blankets. The horses cannot tighten their own ropes. The cattle cannot explain if something is wrong. So before anyone thinks seriously about sleep, there is one more round of work waiting in the cold. You pull your coat snugly around your shoulders and step back into the snowy darkness. The wind greets you with familiar determination. It has not grown stronger. It has not weakened. It simply continues, as though it intends to keep blowing forever. Snow squeaks beneath your boots. That sound catches your attention. Fresh snow usually crunches. Tonight it squeaks. The colder the temperature becomes, the drier the snow grows, and the tiny crystals rub together with a faint, high-pitched sound that almost resembles rubbing 2 pieces of polished glass together. You had never noticed it before this journey. Now it seems impossible to ignore. The oxen stand close together inside the wagon circle. Their great bodies form a living wall against the cold. Steam rises steadily from their backs where snow settles and melts before freezing again around the edges of their thick coats. One animal slowly lifts its head as you approach. Its dark eyes reflect the dim firelight. Calm, patient, almost thoughtful. You reach out and rest a hand against its shoulder. Warm, far warmer than the frozen air surrounding both of you. You leave your hand there for a moment longer than necessary, not because the ox needs reassurance, because you do. Many trail journals describe the remarkable endurance of oxen during difficult crossings. Travelers often credited them with saving entire wagon companies through weather that exhausted horses much more quickly. They moved slowly, but they rarely wasted energy, a quality that proved invaluable on journeys measured in months rather than days. One of the drivers checks each yoke carefully. Leather straps, wooden pins, iron rings. Nothing can be allowed to fail during the night. Cold has an unpleasant habit of making ordinary materials behave in extraordinary ways. Leather stiffens, wood contracts, knots that seemed perfectly secure at sunset sometimes loosen before dawn. You kneel beside one harness. A thin layer of frost coats the buckle. You scrape it away with your glove. The metal immediately bites at your fingertips. You pull your hand back with quiet respect. Iron has no sympathy for warm skin. Nearby, a horse stamps one front hoof several times before lowering its head to nose through the snow. Perhaps it hopes to find grass beneath. Perhaps it simply dislikes standing still. Its breath rises in broad white clouds that drift across the camp before disappearing into the darkness. The horses seem more restless than the oxen. Their ears twitch constantly. They shift from one leg to another. One gives a soft snort that echoes through the quiet camp. The oxen merely continue chewing. Their confidence feels contagious. There is an old trail story about a wagon master who insisted that if the oxen remained calm during a storm, the people should remain calm as well. He claimed the animals possessed better judgment than frightened travellers. Whether he truly believed that or simply wished to steady nervous companions is impossible to know, but the saying travelled with more than one emigrant company across the plains. Watching the broad animals now, you begin to understand the idea. They do not worry about tomorrow, they simply endure today. The smell surrounding them grows stronger as you move deeper into the circle. Warm animal breath, hay, leather, wool. A faint earthy scent rising from their heavy coats. It is surprisingly comforting. A modern stable would smell much the same. Some experiences ignore the passing of centuries. A younger traveller carries another armful of hay toward the animals. Not much, just enough for an evening feeding. The hay disappears quickly beneath eager mouths. Every stalk matters. There will be no careless waste. The journey has already taught everyone that supplies disappear faster than expected. You brush loose snow from one ox's broad back. Almost immediately fresh flakes settle in the same place. Nature politely informs you that your efforts are temporary. You continue anyway. Sometimes temporary comfort is still worthwhile. A small calf presses close against its mother. Its coat appears fluffier than the adult's, though appearances can be deceiving beneath drifting snow. The mother barely moves except to nudge the calf gently with her nose. The little one settles even closer. No words, no fuss, just quiet instinct. Several surviving letters from emigrant families mention how closely children watch the livestock during difficult weather. Many young travellers quickly learned that the health of the animals often determined whether the entire company could continue west. Losing an ox was not simply losing an animal. It could mean losing precious time, abandoning supplies, or changing carefully made plans. That knowledge gave even the youngest members of a wagon train an unusually practical view of responsibility. You notice one rope rubbing against a wooden post, not enough to break tonight. Eventually. Perhaps. You adjust it slightly. The rope now hangs with less tension. A small improvement. One less thing to worry about, or at least one less thing until morning. The camp grows quieter with every passing minute. Conversations become whispers. Doors of wooden chests close with muffled thumps. The last cooking pot is finally stored away. Somewhere a baby lets out a brief cry before settling again. The wind carries the sound only a short distance before swallowing it. Researchers examining frontier diaries have pointed out that descriptions of livestock often reveal as much about the people writing as about the animals themselves. Some writers listed practical details with almost mathematical precision. Others described individual oxen and horses with genuine affection, giving them names and distinct personalities. Perhaps both approaches were true. Animals could be tools. Animals could also become trusted companions. Long journeys have a way of blurring those distinctions. You pause near the edge of the wagon circle and look outward. Beyond the nearest drifting snow lies complete darkness. No fences, no roads, no welcoming lights from distant houses. Only the endless prairie hidden beneath winter. It feels unimaginably vast. The camp itself seems tiny. A handful of wagons, a few glowing embers, several patient animals, dozens of people hoping morning will arrive safely, nothing more, nothing less. The realization does not frighten you quite as much as it might have earlier. Perhaps exhaustion has softened your worries. Perhaps shared work has done the same. You return to the ox you greeted earlier. It blinks slowly. Its steady breathing